Hi all, it's Alexis again from Kennedy here with another installment of reading a bit of a book online. Today I decided to go Asian. I chose something from Japan, The Tale of Genji by Murasaki Shikibu. Murasaki Shikibu was a lady in waiting within the Japanese imperial court during the Heian period, specifically the 11th century. And for those of you who are not familiar with that period of Japanese history, it lasted from 740 to 1185 CE, and it is typically known as a golden age in Japan just because it was a very politically stable period. The nobility at that time spent their hours developing a court aesthetic. They pursued activities like painting, calligraphy, playing music, writing poetry, going on nature jaunts. So you get kind of an idea of like just a court just at leisure all the time, working on developing the arts. And as a result, we see a proliferation of the arts during this time, specifically in the form of waka poetry, narrative literary tales like The Tale of Genji, and we see diaries written called Nikki. And what makes these very, very special for this period in history is that they're written by women. We don't typically see that. So that's what's survived from the period, these works written by women, especially when we get to subsequent periods in Japanese history where we really see a shift in the political, cultural, and social life of Japan, especially where women are concerned. We kind of see a decline in their positions of power, how they're exercising that power, etc. So moving on to what the Tale of Genji is about. So as the title suggests, it is about a young man named Genji who happens to be one of the sons of the emperor and a concubine. And it details his life and experiences at court. And really, like with any period literature and like, the Odyssey, which I read before, we can learn a lot about Japanese culture and life in the Heian period from this work, especially from the point of view of women, because women are writing these sources. I chose The Tale of Genji because as I film this, it's the last day of April, it's still National Poetry Month, and the book includes both prose and poetry in it, so it's a great example of different forms of Japanese writing. Also, we're seeing a lot more spring-like weather. Nature is a very big theme in Japanese literature, so I found it highly appropriate for this time of year. And I really want to challenge you all to get outdoors while practicing safe social distancing. Paint a landscape, watch some birds, take up bird watching. I know my husband, who's been working in this office at home lately during these weeks of quarantine, has been photographing birds from the home office because there's a window right in front of me. Photograph other types of nature, anything that strikes your fancy. Work on your garden, take a walk, and let us know how you're enjoying the spring weather and what you're doing at home. You can share these photos, works of art, whatever again strikes your fancy in the comments below, and let us know how you guys are doing. If you liked my reading of The Tale of Genji, you can read the rest of the novel on archive.org, and I'll include a link of it within the comments. I didn't start from the beginning. I chose something that was a little bit further in. I think it's past the halfway point, and I chose this section because I think it gives a good example of how important nature was to the Japanese, how big of a theme it was. It's a good example of court life, and it also has bits of poetry in it. And I want to... Have any of you guys seen any Bollywood films? So I'm kind of thinking of this as an analogy of how when you watch a Bollywood film, they kind of spontaneously break out into dance. Well, poetry was kind of like that for the Japanese, so that they would use poetry to send letters back and forth to each other. They would have poetry competitions or just kind of start spouting poetry as inspiration drove them. It was kind of more a part of daily life as opposed to, just writing it down. It was definitely something that they did just at the spur of the moment. So anyway, I'm going to start with this chapter of the Tale of Genji. So here it goes. The 20th of the 3rd month had passed, and the spring garden's flowers and birdsong were lovelier than ever, until people began to wonder how they could possibly have lasted so long. The groves on the hills, the view of the island, the expanses of richly glowing moss, when all these seemed to make the younger women a little restless, Genji had Chinese-style barges made and outfitted, and on the very day they were launched he summoned people from the Office of Music to perform aboard them. A great many princes and senior nobles came. Her Majesty was then at home. The mistress of the southeast quarter thought it time to answer Her Majesty's challenge to one, whose garden waits to welcome spring. And he himself had spoken of wishing he could show her all their flowers, but since she could not visit without sufficient reason, merely for the pleasure of the blossoms, he had young gentlewomen of hers, ones apt to enjoy the adventure, board a boat and row toward them along the southern lake. The boundary knoll he had put between the gardens did not keep them from coming right round its little promontory, and up to the east fishing pavilion, where he had assembled other women from his side. The dragon prow and rock prow barges were adorned magnificently in continental style, and the boys wielding the steering oars wore thin tresses as in China. The astonished women were thrilled and delighted to see them launched on so broad a lake, and they felt as though transported to an unknown land. When they came under the great rocks of the island's little cove, they marveled to find the least stone standing as though in a painting. The trees near and far, their branches merging in veils of brocade into the mist, drew their gaze toward their distant goal, where willows trailed bright green fronds and blossoms cast ineffable perfumes upon the air. The cherries that were gone elsewhere smiled here in all their beauty, and the wisteria twined about the galleries opened into deep-hued clusters, flower dragon, and rock-prow barges by flower. How marvelously the carrier roses were mirrored in the water and spilled in superb profusion from the bank. Waterbirds sporting in loyal pairs flitted about with twigs in their bills, while mandarin ducks made a brilliant pattern on the ground weave of the waves, until one longed only to turn it all into a painted design. That day one's axe handle could well have rotted away. When the breezes blow, the very waves seem to bloom in lovely colors. Could this then be the far-famed Cape of Carrier Roses? Why, the lake in spring must recall the glinting stream of the river, for the carrier roses blossom also in its depths. No, I shall not seek the mountain the tortoise bears. It shall be my fame. I choose immortality here aboard this very boat. As our boat glides on through the sweetly mild sunshine of a fine spring day, every drop the oars let fall blossoms into a flower. Such were the trifles with which they amused each other, almost forgetting as they did so where they were going and whence they had come, because they had of course lost their hearts to the mirroring water. The royal deer rang out nobly as dusk fell, and it was only then that they reluctantly put into the fishing pavilion and disembarked. The place was done up very plainly, but gracefully so, and the young women from each side, all dressed to uphold their pride, and very pretty too, presented the beauty of the floral brocade. The dances performed were novel and rare. Genji had chosen the dancers with particular attention, and he made sure that they devoted all their art to pleasing the watching ladies. After dark he was still eager for more. He ordered cressets lit in the near garden, called the musicians onto the moss below the steps, and had each of the princes and senior nobles take up his own favorite instrument, stringed or wind. After the pick of the professionals had played in the so mode, those above them took up the music brilliantly on the koto, and so on. Their playing of Ah, Wondrous Day brought the most ignorant men-servants in to listen among the horses and carriages crowded by the gate, smiling broadly as though life was at last worth living. The beauty of the sky, the tone of the instruments, the spring mood and mode had surely made plain to all by now that season's higher worth. The music went on through the night, when the mode shift led into Joy of Spring. His Highness of War sang Green Willow twice, very nicely. His Grace their host joined in as well. Dawn came, and at daybreak Her Majesty beyond the knoll was very sorry to hear the singing of the birds. Today was the first of Her Majesty's scripture reading. Many of those present for the music did not withdraw to attend it just as they were, but rather found a discreet corner to change into full civil dress. Some who had engagements elsewhere actually left. Everyone who planned to attend went there at the hour of the horse, led by Genji himself. All the privy gentlemen came, most of them joined Genji's entourage, and the event went forward with imposing splendor. The Lady of Spring graciously sent an offering of flowers. 8 page girls dressed as butterflies or birds appeared. She had made sure they were especially pretty ones. The birds bearing cherry blossoms in silver vases, the butterflies Korea roses in vases of gold, and the flowers were the most glowingly perfect of their kind. They rode out from beside the knoll. A breeze sprang up as they came before Her Majesty, scattering a few cherry petals. The day was clear and calm, and the way they came forth from the mists was charmingly moving. The dancers' tent had been left purposefully where it was, and the gallery between the 2 pavilions had been done up for the musicians, and provided for the time being with folding chairs. The girls came up to the steps and presented their flowers. The incense-bearers received the flowers and stood them beside the holy water vessels. It was the captain, Genji's son, who read out the donor's message. Dancer dressed as a bird, will you look askance, O pine cricket in the grass, longing for autumn, even at these butterflies from my own flower garden? Her Majesty smiled, recognizing the reply to her poem about autumn leaves. My lady, the gentlewomen of the day before insisted, still intoxicated by the flowers. You could have found no fault there with the beauty of spring. The birds resounded bravely amid warblers' sweet carolings, while here and there upon the lake water birds sang their own songs, and the effect of the rapid conclusion was endlessly delightful. How lightly, then, the butterflies flitted about to flutter into the hedge at last among cascading Caria roses. Her Majesty's household deputy and the other privy gentlemen, so entitled, passed their rewards on, one to the other, and gave the page girls theirs. The birds got cherry blossom long dresses, and the butterfly ones in Caria rose. It was just as though these had been prepared beforehand. The musicians, according to rank, got a white layering or a roll of silk. The captain had laid across his shoulders a wisteria long dress as well as a full set of women's robes. This was Her Majesty's reply. Yesterday, you know, I could have cried aloud. Come, they seemed to say, and your butterflies might well have lured me away, if between us did not grow bank on bank of Caria rose. It may be that despite their distinction and accomplishment, they both found the effort too great, because their poems are hardly what one would wish to have from them. So that's where I'm going to end it today. It wasn't quite a full chapter. I skipped a little bit of a section. But again, as I said, if you're interested in reading the whole book, you can find it on archive.org, and I'll leave it, as I said, in the comments. But I do want to give you some recommendations. So if you want something that is a period piece, but maybe is a little bit different from the Tale of Genji, you kind of like the ideas of the Nikki or the diaries, I would recommend that you look into Sei Shonagun's The Pillow Book. Sei Shonagun was a contemporary of Murasaki Shikibu, but they served different women in the imperial household, so they actually were kind of at odds with each other. And I think, if I remember correctly, it's been a few years since I've read it. I think Murasaki makes an appearance in the book. Or it's either vice versa, because there's also the Diary of Murasaki Shikibu, too, which you could read. And Sei makes an appearance in that, or it could be both. It's been, as I said, it's been a while since I've read them. So give those a look. If any of you guys are familiar with the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York, which, just side note, if you're ever in New York City, if you travel there, when things are lifted, I would highly, highly, highly recommend that you go and spend a few days there. It is a fantastic and very neat art museum. Excuse me. And I say that as one that I don't typically, I'm not excited to go to an art museum. I usually like going to history museums. But anyway, the Metropolitan Museum of Art is offering a free download of a book of art based on the Tale of Genji, and I can put that link in the comments for you. I've kind of given it a flip through, and it's pretty neat. If you want to see a graphic novel version of the Tale of Genji, Hoopla has one of those available for download, but just be aware that it's not the full novel. It'll just kind of give you a taste, but it might be a little easier to read if what I read today sounded a little, I don't want to say challenging, but I'm not quite sure what the word is that I'm looking for maybe off the top of my head. But I'm not going to give it a lot of thought. Maybe just daunting. Daunting may be the word I'm looking for there. But it can give you kind of the taste of the book in a different format, one that's, a little bit more conducive to help you imagine, like what is going on. And there's also an anime version of the Tale of Genji out there, as well as a film version, which I haven't seen, but again, different formats of the novel. If you want to learn more about Japanese history, but you don't want to you don't want a huge history book, I would look into Brett Walker's A Concise History of Japan. And what makes it really interesting to me is that it also kind of has an environmental angle to it. So he's telling the history of Japan, but he's also taking into account environmental factors as opposed to just political and other viewpoints, which is a little different. It includes that other stuff too, but the environmental angle as as something that's influencing events is also a neat perspective and very different too. If you want me to broaden out to Japanese culture in general, on top of my list is Rashomon, which is both a film and a book. I typically like reading the book and then seeing the movie, but in this case, I've not read the book, but the movie is fantastic. And if you've not seen it, it's basically a murder told from multiple viewpoints during a trial. And you have to kind of figure out what exactly happened because each viewpoint is different. So it kind of gives you a sample of what a historian does. So historians take these primary sources and they have a different story to tell, and you kind of have to tease out what might have really happened. But anyway, definitely worth a watch. Probably a read too, because typically the book is better than the movie. But it's not always the case. It's not always the case. I did read one recently that I liked the movie better. Anything by Studio Ghibli or Akira Kurosawa is worth a watch. My favorite Studio Ghibli film is either, I would say, Spirited Away or Kiki's Delivery Service is also very good, and My Neighbor Totoro, which has a cat bus, and it's very cool. I love cats, so I really want a cat bus. There's also lots of good anime out there. Full Metal Alchemist Brotherhood is probably one of my favorites. It's mainly due to the relationships between the characters that I like it, and also you really get invested into kind of the evolution of the Elric brothers and their quest to help one regain his body. And I won't go more into what exactly happens, but give it a watch. It's not one that I would watch with younger kids. It's maybe teenagers for sure, but not really young kids. Speaking of kids, my teenage daughter really likes Fruits Basket, again, because she finds the characters very cute and interesting, and she also likes the relationship dynamics among them all. And I've watched bits and pieces of that one. I've not seen it all, but I do have to agree with her that they are kind of cute. I wouldn't mind giving that one a full watch. And then Dragon Ball is one of those that's kind of classic Japanese anime. There's a ton of different series out there. If you don't want to get heavily invested, I would not recommend Dragon Ball Z because the story arcs take forever. One that we recently watched, which is on Crunchyroll, is Dragon Ball Super. So it's kind of a truncated version of what you see in, well, it's later on. It's after the events of Dragon Ball Z, and you see snippets from Dragon Ball Z in the series, but the story arcs don't take a gazillion episodes. So that gives you a sense of what Dragon Ball Z seems like. Story arcs take gazillions and gazillions of episodes, and the episodes just don't move that fast. But anyway, I think that's where I'll end it with the recommendations. If you want more recommendations on this or anything in general, please visit our website and ask a librarian. We all have different interests, so just take a look at who's interested in what, and we can recommend something to you. We're all checking our email. on a daily basis. So we will get back to you as soon as we can on it. And then again, if you like it, if you like this, please let us know. If you have an idea of what maybe I should read next time, I'm kind of leaning towards the Decameron, which was written around the period of the Black Death, and it's basically 14 survivors of the Black Death gathering around and telling stories to each other. So I thought it, again, very appropriate kind of for the times that we're living in right now. So, yeah, I hope you guys stay safe, and I will see you next time. Ciao.